Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 30th, 2019. Time for yet another show. Time to impeach the president. Whatever else you might need to get done today. Time to hide the USS John McCain. I'm sure you've heard that news. All kinds of things going on this morning. All kinds of things. Starting from immediately following our program yesterday. The news couldn't wait. Right at 11 o'clock, they pounced and gave us a full, 22 hours of news cycle to cover today. Luckily, we have Greg Dworkin coming by later on to help us out with that one. And that's good news. We'll be able to catch up that way. And let's see. Here's what's on tap according to Bill in Portland, Maine. Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, and Dem from Connecticut, that's Greg. Reenact yesterday's Mueller statement, that's the special counsel, using finger puppets, a helium tank, which is hard to get a hold of these days, there's a helium shortage, and a case of Schlitz, though my preference for, I think my preferred vehicle for Schlitz delivery is the 40-ounce bottle. Oh, did Schlitz do 40s? I think so. We used to have, there was a, I don't know if there's such a thing as a Schlitz knockoff, Schmitz beer in Easton, Pennsylvania, back in my Lafayette College days, produced a 40-ounce bottle, and I think the actual Schlitz stuck with the 32-ounce along with Miller Genuine Draft. Never went to the 40. Never really understood that one. Great marketing ploy, as far as I can tell, for selling your product to probably mostly illegal underage drinkers or people who really could stand to cut back a little bit on the beer anyway. But hey, that's America for you. That's where we are. And as a result, most of us apparently unable to read the Mueller report. Yesterday's press conference packed a wallop for one in which he didn't say anything other than what he had said before, and didn't take very long to do it, and didn't take any questions as well. But that's kind of what we expected from Mueller. A lot of people disappointed, I think, initially that the crux of his statement was that there would be no further statements, or at least he hoped that there would be no further statements. Didn't essentially want to testify before Congress. Didn't rule it out entirely, but basically said, if you call me to testify, I'm basically going to tell you what I've written in the report is my testimony. The report is my testimony. He actually said that. And he did clear things up a little bit for people who didn't digest it the first time, I guess, saying, we found that the president did not commit a crime, and that was provable, we would have said so. We would have been happy probably to say so. He might have said, I wouldn't have been convinced necessarily, but he would have said so. And he said, well, we didn't do that. And of course, lots of spin. The spin machine is at full throttle, I guess, saying, if you're not going to say we committed a crime, in this country, we did see this from a state attorney general, somebody saying, if this country, if you're not guilty, you're innocent, which is not really actually how it works. If you're put on trial and you aren't found guilty, you're found not guilty, which is a very specific and very different thing than innocent. We don't know. I don't think we can judge anyone's innocence, and it probably wouldn't be worth judging anyone's innocence per se. But the question is only whether we can find you guilty based on the evidence presented and a reasonable standard for holding you to our analysis of the evidence, or it just doesn't reach that level. It may very well mean that we can't find you guilty under the law, but it's not that you're innocent here. And it's never been the goal of the criminal justice system to find out whether people are innocent, per se. Simply not guilty will do. And every lawyer knows that, except, I guess, the attorney general of whatever crazy state that was that wants to claim him. Okay. Many other stories happening today. The chief among them, I guess, the news that I don't know who, although really it was Donald Trump, behind the whole thing. The U.S. Navy apparently under some instructions from somewhere to hide the vessel USS John McCain and all references to it while Trump was in Japan for Memorial Day. Hide the ship named after, I guess, 3 veterans. All the John McCains are involved in this one. It's not simply Senator John McCain that we knew, but his father and grandfather also, I guess, Navy. His father was an admiral, probably his grandfather as well. I don't know. Maybe Greg can clear that one up. But I guess they couldn't hide the evidence of having tried to hide the ship, which is a difficult thing to hide in the first place. Although why they ever thought that Squinty Magoo idiot was going to be able to read the name John McCain from a distance, either on people's hats or whatever, I have no idea. But somebody got worried about it. Trump claims he had nothing to do with it, although honestly, either he did or the White House and Pentagon are staffed by people equally moronic and everybody needs to go. But whatever. We'll round that up and everything else. Let's start. I guess I would have let Greg in here. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
Hi. Don't say John McCain.
John McCain. The thing is,
yes.
Trump this morning said, I had nothing to do with it, but it was well-meaning aides.
Yes, all the well-meaning
people good
aides.
on both, good people on both sides did this.
Right. I mean, the idea that you think the president is that fragile is very sad. You might be right, which is also sad.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. Whoever did it.
Yeah.
And Trump would have preferred it, but he didn't specifically do it himself. The weird thing
yes, he did.
Is that when confronted with the story, Mercedes Schlapp, Matt Schlapp's wife, who was a spokesperson for the White House, immediately said fake news. But it was confirmed. It was confirmed. And in fact,
is a fake person.
CNBC, of all people, got a hold of the email going back and forth between the people arranging this. I gave you a copy of that. It's in the stuff I sent you.
Yeah,
but they had 3 points that this needs to be in position. We need to use the landing area closer for the press. And point number 3, the USS John McCain needs to be out of sight. I mean, that was in the email.
It was a hippie, though. It needs to be out of sight, man.
Out of sight, man. It's like totally cool.
Sure does. Okay, well, that's bad, and you shouldn't do those things. And he wasn't going to notice, and even if he did, how much more damage could he really do? Is he going to bomb Japan again? I guess it's possible.
Right. So we're going to talk before we get to the big story of the day, of course, which is Robert Mueller and impeachment. But I want to set that up for you by asking you a simple question.
All right.
You ready?
It's another one. Second question. Go ahead.
Second question. You watched Game of Thrones, right?
Third question. Yes.
Did you read the books?
No.
No. You didn't read the books.
Right.
So Robert Mueller says, I know all these people who watch Game of Thrones but never read the damn book.
Right.
I better go out there and tell them what was in the book.
Right. Exactly.
Because
the story
watching
changed.
it, the visuals are just so much more important in terms of disseminating information.
Yes.
Than expecting people to go read the 3, 5, 7-part trilogy, whatever.
400 pages.
I forgot how many books are in Games of Thrones. I read the first 2 books years ago.
I think.
At a time that he hadn't finished writing everything, and I still think he hasn't finished writing everything.
Yeah, he hasn't.
But the point is that you're going to get a lot more people involved and engaged if you make a movie than if you do writing a book, expecting people to read the book.
Absolutely. Even an audio book.
And remember the appendices.
Right.
I'm one of those people that read the Lord of the Rings appendices and remember them, but there's a movie.
Yes, it's a lot more fun from my perspective. I don't like spending my time reading. I want to hear it. I want to see it. I want to talk about it with other people while it's going on.
And that's what happened with Mueller talking about his book that you didn't read.
Yeah.
And that's why it was so compelling. And, the other thing I noticed, we've talked about this on the show, it may be pop science, but it just still has a lot of resonance to me. The difference between the N, that is to say the intuitive approach, and the S, which is the observational approach. The pundits who were analyzing Mueller, especially when he first came on,
yes,
especially in the minutes before he first came on, right?
Right.
The S observational people were saying,
They certainly are
I don't
S
understand. What's the big deal? He's simply reiterating stuff that was in his report. We all know this already.
Right. Oh, Yargle Bargle. They were very angry.
And
Those are the people who
were
read
saying,
the Game of
look,
Thrones.
this is big because he's now reaching a larger audience and summarizing the important things for people who never read the report. It's nice that you read the report. And if you think that you have a complaint, news people, especially you S reporters, if you think you have a complaint that this is being treated like big news when in fact there's nothing new here, that's a comment on how you covered it the first time, jerks.
In a way, yes. And in a big way, too. I find that fascinating.
too.
Not just because of that, but I mean, honestly, even if everybody had read it, like, I love that complaint. What, didn't you read the book? Yeah, I mean, but that didn't stop you from tweeting about it when you read it, right? You just kept, why didn't you just assume we all read it and just keep your comments to yourself?
Right.
And it's because people want to talk about it together. And I think that...
Did you see Dr. Zhivago? That guy was so handsome. Oh, yeah? Well, did you read the book?
Right. I don't know. The books, I have an excuse for Game of Thrones. I actually don't like fantasy books. But
right.
The show was good.
Well, you know what? A lot of people don't write... they didn't read the Watergate report.
Yeah.
They didn't read the Pentagon Papers.
These gigantic reports are very difficult to digest unless
they didn't read the Panama Papers.
Yeah, that's true. Unless you have a professional reason for doing it, it's a tough thing to ask Americans in general to sit down and read anything. And a 400-page report is nearly impossible. I'm dying to actually read the thing, but when am I going to do that? I'm too busy, giving America health care and good-paying jobs, apparently.
Exactly, especially when you have a propaganda network like Fox News saying there's nothing in the book, don't read it.
Yeah, well, I won't listen to that, but still.
And the funny thing is how shocked they were. I have a little tweet from Oliver Darcy yesterday. Over on Fox, Brett Baier calls Mueller's statement striking and notes it was not anywhere clear-cut, as Attorney General Bill Barr initially characterized it. In fact, Baier said, it was almost the opposite.
Wow. Well,
Judge Napolitano adds on Fox that Attorney General Bill Barr basically whitewashed what Mueller said back in March.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not talking about the primetime people, the Ingrams and the Hannitys and such.
Yeah. Well.
But it is striking, indeed, that what Mueller said had so much impact yesterday for just a variety of reasons. And the cynics who say, well, he's just going to tell us stuff we already know. What's the point? He's doing it at Department of Justice. And we talked about this on the show when we first got word of it. There's not going to be huge bombshells. The initial report itself was a bombshell. So if he winds up talking about his own report and nothing else, it's still a big deal.
Yeah. Even when people read it, honestly, if you got everybody to read it, you would need to say this 100 times. It's just like any other messaging, essentially. It just needs to be repeated over and over again.
I read Hamlet. It was just like seeing Laurence Olivier do it on stage, right? I mean, same thing.
Sure. I guess so. I mean, there's certainly a different understanding.
I saw Patrick Stewart do Macbeth. It was just like reading the book.
Yeah. Well, in some cases, yes. Now, in the Game of Thrones, they changed the story a lot, but... But
the visuals, the whole idea of what you take in when you hear it and when you see somebody do this is just, it's enormous. And, of course, there's a lesson there in terms of holding impeachment hearings.
Yes.
What impact will they have? It'll be riveting.
We don't know. We can't tell. We've never had impeachment hearings before with ratings. Yeah.
They didn't do it in Nixon's age. Oh, wait, they did, and everybody watched.
Damn, history. Well, someone should write that down so we can all read it.
The other fun thing, of course, is playing Lindsey Graham's tapes over and over to him.
Yes.
About all the stuff he said about impeachment and why it was so necessary to do so.
Right. But
and Justin Amash is still driving the news in terms of his approach to it. So I want to talk about some other stuff besides Mueller and impeachment, but it's sort of hard not to, given that it's just like the huge story of the day. And, of course, Trump makes it a bigger story. Remember that Mueller started and finished his book report with Russia.
Russia
influenced the 2016 election, and they're going to do it again if we don't do something about it.
Yes, or even
from
if
his
we
perspective, that's the main message. And by the way, if Trump weren't president, he would have been indicted. But the main thing you got to be aware of is Russia influenced the election. Donald Trump tweets this morning, Russia, Russia, Russia. That's all you heard at the beginning of this witch hunt hoax. And this witch hunt, when he writes it, is not hyphenated like one of the other witch hunts was hyphenated. So it's hard to know who's writing his tweets. But this one says, and now Russia has disappeared because, and I emphasize this part, I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected, end quote.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the first time he's actually admitted Russia helped him get elected, which obviously raises legitimacy issues, which is why his lawyers wouldn't let Trump testify. Because once he opens his mouth, he says stuff that he wants to take back.
Right. I understand, he's trying to retract that now.
So he tried to retract it, but the tweet is there. So when he says Russia helps me get elected, and he says it,
right,
and then you ask him, Mr. President, you just said that Russia helped you get elected. He said, no, I didn't. That's nonsense. It's fake news. It's like Mercedes Schlapp saying that the USS John McCain had nothing to do with being hit. But it did.
Yeah.
And so they're just flat out lying to you. They don't even bother with the subtlety anymore. It's like Argument Clinic from Monty Python.
Yeah.
This isn't an argument. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. I mean, there's no other substance to their complaints here. And it's highly significant that Trump accidentally, because this is not genius on his part, admitted that Russia helped him, because that immediately raises legitimacy questions that he really doesn't want to deal with. His deepest fear is that people will see his election as illegitimate.
I do. So
second to going to jail, of course.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, that's probably first on his mind.
There's a great Mike Lukovich cartoon.
Yeah?
With Trump sitting in a, one of those office chairs with the four wheels and kind of a cross shape on the bottom. So clearly an office chair. It's got some hand rests, and he's sitting in the chair.
Yes.
With his hands on the hand rest, staring straight ahead in space. And one of his aides says to the other aides, he's not getting up. He heard that you can't indict a sitting president.
See, I knew that would eventually become an issue. I told you, that's how he's going to get out of this. All right.
He's not going to move.
Pretty much. And I think they actually believe that there will be people who make that argument at some point. It's just inevitable.
Well, he can't sit forever.
He might be able to.
Right. So the background and the way that this wound up hitting Washington and the political political world in such a big way had a lot to do with the visuals and the fact that, Mueller did what he didn't want to do, which is he went on TV and he spoke.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a voice that sounded like Jared Kushner or Elmer Fudd.
Yes, right. Or the helium we were supposed to use today.
Right, which there's a shortage of, so we can't.
Right.
But, it just is going to have a continuous impact. And the pressure now is going to be ratcheting up on the Democrats, of course, to do something. Here is the problem.
All right.
If the Democrats don't do anything, they look weak. Yeah. They look like they're calculating rather than trying to do the right thing. Justin Amash is there as a counterpoint in terms of what happens when you just do the right thing, including the applause he got at his own town hall when he did that.
Yeah.
But Nancy Pelosi reflects her caucus. Republicans have a conference, Democrats have a caucus, right? And I always get that confused. And so they did a head count. She got 38. Some of the reporters got 41. Out of all of Congress, there's only 41 some odd people asking for impeachment. It's like a tenth of Congress.
Yes.
And until those numbers change, until Democrats publicly start calling for impeachment, when she says the votes aren't there, she's probably right. She's a pretty good vote counter.
Oh, yeah. I don't doubt that she's got the vote counted. And sometimes it depends on what the question is.
Sure.
Those numbers have changed
and also what
in the last
tells
week.
You too.
Yes, that influences things. People say, I really have no idea how to calculate out the political pros and cons of this. Oh, well, we do, and we're against impeachment. Oh, okay. Well, then I will be too. It's a different question. How many people have called for it? How many people would go along with it if there was a floor vote? How many people would reluctantly change their mind? How many people moved in the last week? There's a lot of moving parts here. So yeah, don't lose your focus. I will say it again because, again, all messages have to be repeated over and over. And some people will think this is a new one. But your job, if you are interested in seeing impeachment move forward, is to continue to say so loudly, even if you believe in your heart of hearts that Nancy Pelosi has a secret plan to get there. Part of that plan is probably having people like you saying we need an impeachment and her saying, no, we don't.
I'm a big fan of the old FDR adage, whether it's true or not, it's probably apocryphal. But FDR meeting with people and saying, I agree with you, and then make me do it. Yeah, it's part of politics. It's always been part of politics.
Yes.
Right? I met with Ted Kennedy one time about an issue. I don't even remember what the issue was, but I was a constituent of his. I was living in Boston at the time as a college student. And he said to me, that's fascinating. How many votes do you have?
Yeah. Right. Well, it's
so let me just kindly, instruct you on how things work. You come to me with votes, I can do more.
Yeah, it's not you'll never get them or you can't get them or I'll destroy you if you try.
Or you shouldn't be asking. It's just, look, kid, here's how it works.
Yeah,
get me the votes and I'm more than happy to help you.
It's very interesting. And some people walk away with that from that and saying, I've just been insulted by my senator. And others walk away and say, I have just been educated by my senator.
And I walked away thinking I'd just been educated by my senator.
Right. This happened again not so long ago with Dianne Feinstein and kids. And anger, how dare she tell them what to do and how to do it?
Yeah, they're kids. They know better.
All right.
Oh, really?
Guess so. All right.
So. Well. So process matters.
Yep.
Another process question that matters in regard to the impeachment question as we see it play out is timing. Okay. So there's a recess in August, and chances are if by July there isn't an impeachment train, there probably won't be.
You mean in terms of getting it started there? Yeah.
You don't have to finish by August, but you have to get it started by July.
I guess so. Although there will be a lot of effort, I think, expended on finding, cornering, and pressuring members who are at home during the recess.
Yeah, there will be. The other side of the coin, of course, is that if and when, because I think. I still think impeachment is ratcheting up. Mueller certainly turned the heat up yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I think it's inevitable, but it's inevitable only in a slow walk fashion because you have to build a consensus to do that. Yeah. Independents still aren't there yet.
Well,
Democrats barely are.
Combining all of that, I would say the task for activists, take that into account and spend the time between now and July telling your representatives either directly or as a group, August is going to be uncomfortable for you if you're at home and not prepared to answer to pressure for an impeachment. That train needs to start by July. We can aim at that, but you can certainly be telling them what we're going to be doing is making your August uncomfortable. You know what? Don't come home unless you're ready to talk about this.
Because we'll be there to meet you and so on and so forth. So that's the background to all of this. I think it's why the Mueller discussion, the book report that he gave on TV had so much impact. Yeah. And, I think that's all part and parcel of what's going on. Notice that none of that has anything to do with do the right thing. Do the right thing is something that people say, but in real life, it's always more complicated than that. Always, always, always. It's not wrong to do the right thing, but it's got to be do the right thing. And by the way, here's the mechanism, and this is why it's advantageous to you, and all the other stuff you need to persuade people. Mm-hmm. You can't just tell them what to do. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, I mean, you might wish it did. And even they might wish it did.
They might wish it did, right, but that's not how it works. So that's the background here, and I do think that you're going to hear more and more impeachment discussion. If you want to look at it in terms of Overton window types of discussions, it's a totally legitimate thing to talk about impeachment now.
Okay.
Also, it's a totally legitimate thing to talk about Russia helping Trump get elected because Trump admitted that happened.
Yep. I had nothing. I was also fascinated by the angle. I had nothing to do with this thing that had everything to do with me.
Right.
there's nothing we would rather have more to do with than things that are about you, but okay.
Don't ask me why I'm so cozy with Putin.
Yeah, right.
Now the follow-up to that,
yes.
On NPR, he was asked, okay, so are you going to do anything about it next time? Are you going to accept Russia help next time? And he dodged the question. The guy wants Russian help again.
I'll take it. Sure.
He will take it because it's the only way he's going to get reelected.
Yeah, it's a pretty good bet for him. And he's an extraordinarily, dumb guy. He walked right into that one this morning. There was a couple other angry, goofy tweets that are also not very helpful to his case, but wow. There's a lot.
Anyway, here's a piece in Roll Call by John Bennett. Trump says he doesn't want to be impeached, but he sure acts like it.
People do say that.
Yeah.
I was still stuck in pocket there as a couple of pieces addressing that.
Or put it this way, if he did want to get impeached, what would he be doing that he's not doing now?
That's true. Although, the way he's so incompetent, it's hard to tell. I'm still not a fan of the theory that he's really trying to get impeached. I just think he doesn't know how to avoid it. So he's just accidentally bumbling into it over and over again.
When he says he does not want to be impeached, I think that's utterly counterfactual to what he really wants, said Barbara Perry, Director of Presidential Studies at the University of Virginia's Miller Center. G. William Hoagland, who was an aide to former GOP Senator Majority Leader Bill Frist, I knew that name was familiar, said it appears Trump knows impeachment brings little risk of ending his presidency because Republicans control the Senate. In fact, Hoagland and others say it might be the major X factor that will extend Trump's political career. This all goes in the mix of Nancy Pelosi trying to weigh the options of what's best.
Yeah. It's a theory that's out there, but it requires a thinking and strategic president. So I don't know. I mean, it may be
but she's a thinking and strategic speaker. I'm just saying, don't just tell me she's stupid or she doesn't get it. No, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yes, well, most things are. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the USS John McCain show here on Netroots Radio. Oh my God, I hope Trump isn't listening. Now he'll have to turn the show off. Anyway, let's see, what else is happening here? I know you had some other subjects to hit on besides impeachment. Is that correct? Are you still on mute? Is that what's happening here? I think so. Unless you went...
I was just taking care of the dog. I do have a number of things
all right.
that I wanted to talk about.
I can continue.
But I'm not totally done with impeachment
That is
yet.
fine.
I mean, the fact of the matter is where you stand depends upon where you sit. And it's still true that it's a difficult thing to organize this in a way that gets you where you want to go. There's plenty of opportunities on the propaganda network to describe impeachment proceedings as a coup, rally around your tribe. And that's, I think, one of the things Nancy Pelosi is trying to avoid.
All right.
And you may say, well, what's that got to do with doing the right thing? Her point has been, if you do the right thing, you have to do it with results. And so I guess I disagree with some of my fellow progressives and activists in the sense that I do think she needs a little bit of room to try to maneuver this. Armando's probably right that she doesn't want to do this, but that's not the point. It's got nothing to do with what you want. It's a lot to do with what you need. And what she needs to do is if impeachment is going to go ahead, she's got to bring the rest of the caucus there, or the rest of the caucus has to push her there. The chairs have to be there. They're starting to get there. Nadler and some others are starting to make noise about that. Other people in leadership, when Steny Hoyer says it's time that we need to go in this direction, then that they've reached critical mass.
It's pretty close if you can,
because he'll be last.
Yeah.
Right, but he represents a lot of people like him. There are Trump districts that Democrats took in 2018, the Spanbergers and the Connor Lambs, and Pelosi has to represent them as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's her job.
Yes. Okay.
Right? So all of that is disappointing in terms of speed, but fascinating in terms of watching and trying to see all the parts. And again, I said this a couple of weeks ago. I think impeachment is a wave. And and a tide, and you can't fight it forever, but it does things on its own sweet time, and you can't really change the timing of it as much as you would like.
Well, no. All you can do is work.
Events will, and so you got to capitalize on those events, and that's why Robert Mueller speaking is such a big deal.
Yeah. Okay.
What happened? You had Cory Booker, you had Kristen Gillibrand, you had Kamala Harris, and I think other people like Beto were already there, but a bunch of the Democratic candidates yesterday spoke out and said, well, given what Mueller said, we have no choice. You got to impeach.
Yeah.
Well, what changed? The S people will say, yeah, but it was all in the report. Didn't you read the report? And the N people will say, well, he just said it on television where everybody's covering this for 24 hours. If you're going to change your mind on impeachment, this is the perfect time, and you got cover.
Yeah, that's true. People, moments like this will be the big movement moments.
Right. So we'll see what happens with that. So the big stories. Well, of course, Israel's going to have another election. Netanyahu could not form a government.
Okay.
And the reason he couldn't form a government is some of the conservative people who he thought would form a government with him turn out to be from the secular side, and they're very upset with Netanyahu getting too close to the ultra-Orthodox. And the big issue, the key issue yesterday was, do you draft the ultra-Orthodox into the army? Everybody gets drafted in Israel, men and women, except the Orthodox get out of it.
Yes.
And that upsets most of the rest of Israel.
Yes.
So it's a popular thing to say, no, they should be drafted too.
Okay.
Netanyahu refused. So his conservative secular partners said, okay, well, we're not going to do this.
Okay.
And so that was part of what happened. There are some Arab bloc votes in the Knesset.
Yes.
And there used to be like one big super party, and they've broken up into several little parties, feuding with each other. And they want a new election because they want to get back together because they don't have any influence with the little party. You got to get together and get a big party. So there's a number of factors there that went into, we're not going to cooperate with you. So now Netanyahu has to organize another government. And what happens the day that this happens, the day that Netanyahu, in a dramatic fashion, just like on TV, gets to the midnight deadline and can't form a government and therefore has to call for new elections, Jared Kushner lands with the Trump peace plan. Except now he doesn't have a prime minister to talk to.
Right.
So this was a problem.
I wish Jared knew what he was doing. I'm glad he doesn't.
Right. So all of that is what's going on here. There's this couple of articles I sent you from Haaretz, and maybe behind a paywall. I'm sorry about that. One is just entitled, Kushner's Awful Timing, Netanyahu's Political Crisis Could Kill Trump's Peace Plan. So for those of you who think that we're just focusing on international news for no reason, it actually has domestic implications, including the fact that Trump tried to get Netanyahu reelected and apparently failed. And so that itself is going to have political ramifications in Israel.
Yeah. And
then this article, which is an opinion column by Bradley Burson, Netanyahu's darkest, deepest fear just came true. Whatever happens now, however he weasels out of this one, we have come to know Netanyahu for what he really is and always was, which basically is a sad loser.
Okay.
What makes him a loser is that he's a man with no honor, none. Here is a man who every word, every facial expression, every argument, every belief is a false front. There's not one cell of principle in him. If this reminds you of Trump, don't be surprised. You needn't look any deeper than his eyes. His life is falsehood and hatred. His work is falsehood and hatred. His legacy is falsehood and hatred. I guess at the last minute he tried to broker a deal going to the center left party, like abandoning everything he had run on.
Yeah.
Just to stay in power. And that's what sparked this particular column. Of literally thousands of examples, one will suffice. The full 10 years of Netanyahu's unbroken rule has been marked by inaction and broken promises to rescue the relatives of Ethiopian Israelis from starvation and threats of violence in Ethiopia. In recent days, however, a desperate Netanyahu sent word to newly elected member of Knesset Gadi Yvarkin that if the Ethiopia-born lawmaker agreed to desert his centrist opposition party and become the deciding 61st vote to ratify a new Bibi government, the prime minister would name him immigrant absorption minister.
Yeah, good deal.
The message to Yvarkin was clear. Agree to the deal, or the thousands of family members, some of whom have waited decades in Ethiopia for rescue to Israel, will remain as hostages to a government callous as concrete to their plight.
I guess, although I would say probably the same outcome if you did agree.
But a person without honor, it turns out, is a person without a people. This is a man who has destroyed Israel's relationship with the Jewish world, supporting and endorsing far-right leaders who countenance anti-Semites and exploit anti-Semitism. The very fact that he would cozy up to Trump, a guy who says there's good people on both sides in Charlottesville, tells you the story there. This is a man whose compassion, as he himself demonstrated during the recent election campaign, is confined entirely to himself, his wife, and his stay-at-home social media snot of an elder son. I like that one.
Wow.
Right?
Leaving the
an
daughter
entire
out
nation
entirely.
is seeing him as though for the first time. The fact that he couldn't form a government is really questioning everything about his whole aura of hyper-competence and only I can do this and all this other stuff.
Yeah, that'll do that.
Right? So, that is happening.
Yes.
More locally, Josh Krasauer has a really nice piece here, top Trump ally on the ropes in Kentucky, about how Matt Bevin may wind up having a big election battle on his hand with the former governor Bashir's son, Andy Bashir, who's attorney general. And it's an ideologic fight. There's a pull quote from this article. People compare Bevin to Trump all the time, but he's more like Ted Cruz, says one longtime Kentucky GOP operative. Trump somehow picks the correct political enemies, the GOP establishment, the mainstream media, Democratic socialists. Bevin's enemies are your local school teachers.
Oh, yes. Bad.
And then goes on to say, indeed, Kentucky is an ideal laboratory to test the power of partisanship in the Trump era. Despite its conservative heritage, the state has reliably elected Democrats to the governorship for the past 5 decades. The state's still filled with conservative Democrats who support generous government benefits but have turned to the Republican Party amid national Democrats' cultural liberalism and environmental activism. Remember, this is Josh Krasauer, the conservative writing. Facing little competition in the gubernatorial primary, Bevin suffered significant defections in mountainous eastern Kentucky, where public schools and local government are the largest employers. If Bevin can't win by huge margins out east, he's in trouble.
All right.
All right. So Bashir is hoping to capitalize on nostalgia for his father's administration. It's a play Joe Biden's running and is working pretty well for him so far. And the point is, as he writes later, if Bevin is able to win with approval ratings barely above 30%, he'll be blowing up the time-tested rule that politics is about winning new friends and placating enemies. Right? A Bevin victory would mean that enough voters would put aside their personal distaste for the governor simply because they view Bashir's even more unfavorably. He's relying on a Trumpian playbook, but without the loyal support from the GOP base. But if Democrats can win, it will underscore that there's a limit to political tribalism. That's the part I found most interesting.
Yes.
Bashir is well positioned to turn out the liberal base in Lexington and Louisville, cut into the GOP's traditionally huge margins in economically struggling eastern Kentucky, and benefit from his family's connections to the western part of the state. So it's a 50-50 race.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. That goes with this article here in The Hill. Conservatives spark threat of bloody GOP primaries. We're talking about Roy Moore and Chris Kobach, and in North Carolina, primarying Tom Tillis.
Yes, okay.
So, the Senate which Senate and Supreme Court are things that Democrats need to pay more attention to, not just the presidency. And in 2020, those GOP primary issues may give us some openings. It's something we have to pay attention to.
All right. I suggest we do it.
Another story that I think is going to turn out to be huge news.
Huge.
This huge. Michael Wines writes in the New York Times, deceased GOP strategist hard drives reveal new details on the census citizenship question.
Okay.
This is Thomas Hofeller, who was the Michelangelo of gerrymandering.
Yeah.
After he died last summer, his estranged daughter discovered hard drives in her father's home that revealed something else. Mr. Hofeller had played a crucial role in the Trump administration's decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census.
Uh-huh.
And as Ari Berman points out, here is the specifics. Dr. Hofeller concluded in a 2015 study that adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census would clearly be a disadvantage to the Democrats, quote unquote, and, quote, advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites, unquote, in redistricting. In August 2017, Dr. Hofeller helped ghostwrite a draft DOJ letter to Commerce requesting a citizenship question and providing the Voting Rights Act enforcement rationale for doing so. This ghostwritten draft was gave this draft letter to somebody in October 2017, and the letter the DOJ eventually sent to Commerce adopted the same rationale. So there's evidence that Hofeller designed this to hurt Democrats. And so this is like a court case right now.
It's like a court case we've seen before. In North Carolina.
So the fact that you're what's your intent? You can never prove intent. Well, here's intent.
Yeah, don't leave notes about it lying around.
Right.
Well,
don't die. Because if you die, your strange kid might get your notes.
Even the notes you think are hidden might come out. You're not around to keep them in hiding anymore if you're dead.
Right.
Bury me with all my notes.
That seems like a big deal.
Yeah, it is. That's amazing that they keep. It's so weird that they keep stumbling into situations where their intent is exposed.
Yeah. It's like what was it? That Pennsylvania on tape. We're really pleased we were able to pass this voter ID because that's going to help us get reelected.
Right, yeah.
You're not supposed to say the quiet parts out loud.
I think Trump gets paid by Putin. That getting on tape, that's weird.
Dana Rohrabaugh, yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff.
So you're not supposed to say that stuff. But again, we'll have to watch that. But that can't help Trump's case.
No. Not that he won't spend time saying it does. If you listen to the tape, you'll see that I'm right.
This is a question of what the courts think, not what Trump thinks.
Oh, all right.
You're not going to convince him. We know why he's doing it.
Well, I'll just have to change the composition of the courts then.
Right, and then finally, another big story that I think is worth watching, and this is one you followed, I know. Again, the Miami Herald does it.
Yeah.
Federal prosecutors demand Cindy Yang records from Mar-a-Lago and Trump campaign.
Don't die, Cindy.
They are investigating her for being basically a influence broker.
A spy. Yeah.
And a spy, illegal foreign contributions, so on and so forth. Now, They say that the President's Club, Mar-a-Lago, and the fundraising committee for 2020 are not targets of the investigation. They're going after Yang, but they want documents from Mar-a-Lago, and they want documents from the Trump Victory Committee.
Right. So, once again, like when Trump was assured he wasn't the target of the investigations, it's totally not a target this time either.
It's just a coincidence that it's your people and your organizations that are doing all this illegal stuff. The Justice Department has declined to comment.
Because
we should be asking
yesterday.
not Bill Barr. And that's the other thing I think that was worthy of discussion that we didn't touch on in the first part of all of this.
Oh, all right. What?
Trump had a bad day.
Yes.
Among the many other things that happened is Robert Mueller's questioning of Russia interference with the 2016 election, a lot more than meddling, raises questions, existential questions, the New York Times might put it, about Trump's legitimacy. But the other person who had an awful day was Bill Barr, because basically Robert Mueller said, when you did that 4-page summary, you were lying through your teeth.
Yeah.
You did everything wrong. You were lying to the American public. Essentially, he said that.
He did.
And Barr's credibility is non-existent at this point. They could turn and say, well, Bill Barr will decide these things. It doesn't work that way when you're exposed. This is one of those Emperor's New Clothes things. Once people see that Barr has done all of this, you could argue about it. Mueller's telling you he did this.
Yeah.
It's settled.
He can still do these things, and
settled.
He will.
He did it. He lied, okay? Now you can decide whether it was good for him to lie in the service of, the president, just like Trump can decide whether it was good for Russia to help him get elected.
Yeah.
But that they did is not under question anymore.
Not according to Trump, anyway. Yeah, it's very. Barr remains in position to do things by virtue of the fact that he is, they say, Attorney General, and the fact that he's lost all credibility won't stop him from exercising the prerogatives of the Attorney General. We're all it's like reading the book. We're all supposed to know that he's incompetent to the task and corrupt through and through, and we should disregard everything he says. But it still will be reported and recorded as the Attorney General of the United States having ordered this, that, or the other thing, which is supposed to be his prerogative, and everyone will scratch their heads and move forward.
That's what the dry stuff will say. But when you're talking about the media and how they cover things, if you've lost credibility, you get covered differently. Sarah Sanders is not covered the same way anymore.
I guess that's large. Well, it's true in a lot of settings. Although, again,
it's not true for everything. It doesn't end the problem, solve the problem, get rid of him, so on and so forth. There's still a lot of damage he can do, but it's quite different than the aura of institutionalist, serious, very serious person, as Atrius used to call him in capital letters, that Barr came into that position with that kind of aura. That's gone.
The people who are embarrassed,
hack, and everybody can see that now.
Yeah, the people who are embarrassed are the people who spoke up for him earlier.
Exactly.
And said, he's a man of integrity. He'll change the way things are done at the Justice Department.
Exactly right. Anyway, so that's my little roundup for today, little international stuff, which is always important. I always think it's important to follow international things. Some national stuff. Some of the international stuff has national implications.
Yes.
Trump screwed up royally in Japan, and this McCain ship problem doesn't make this any better. And, so he's back on U.S. soil, admitting that Russia helped him get elected and pointing out to everybody that if you weren't aware, I'm not really totally legitimate, and there always should be an asterisk next to my name when you say president. Thank you very much, Mr. Trump. I knew that.
All right. I'm glad
or as Michael Cohen might say, thank you very much, Mr. Trump.
Mr.
Trump. Mr. Trump always is going to have an asterisk.
Yes. All right. Well, I believe in it. By the way, I do have this tweet socked away about the Israel subject. And I haven't seen follow-up to it, but I saw it yesterday from Barak Ravid, who is the senior diplomatic correspondent for Channel 13 News, I guess, in Israel, not Channel 13, the public television in New York. But, breaking, at least last night was breaking.
Yeah.
Netanyahu reveals in his defeat speech, I guess you get to give a defeat speech there. And this is quoted, I proposed to Trump and Putin to form a U.S., Russia, Israel trilateral committee that will meet in Jerusalem to discuss the security situation in the Middle East, and both of them agreed this is unprecedented.
That's he brought Russia into an area where Russia didn't belong.
Yes, so opening the door, it was not enough that they dominate the situation in Syria, which is next door, and traditionally, I think, even Netanyahu supporters have been more or less anti-infiltration from Syria. I think that's stated broadly enough that most people would agree to it. So from their base in Syria, basically this is a 50-year fear coming to fruition here. Israel saying, we've done, although this time it was always the worry that they would, it was never really a worry in Israel. People didn't believe that would ever happen, but if people who analyzed geopolitics around the world thought, what a danger it would be. What if there ever was a split between the United States and Israel, and they turned to the other geopolitical pole for their support. And that's the excuse for everything we've ever done that people have thought was horrible or at least inappropriate on Israel's behalf, was that we had to maintain our foothold in the single democracy in the region and the best U.S. ally, etc., because Russia was involved in everywhere else. And now Netanyahu, nationalist champion that he is, says, you know what, we should invite the Russians in via Syria. And we can do that now without breaking with the United States because the U.S. is now presided over by a pro-Russia traitor. So what an opportunity.
Or as Bruce Bartlett put it succinctly, they should just make Trump the prime minister. Cut out the middleman.
I guess so. Although, yeah, I mean, some argument for who is the more competent crook in that question. I don't know whether I would rather, maybe rather have a technocrat like Netanyahu running things. Although, how are the buses running in
Israel's? This is from Yair Rosenberg. Israel's last election was run as a referendum on Netanyahu. The opposition tried to capitalize on Bibi's broader unpopularity with the electorate. He countered by arguing he was the only one responsible adult in the room. Are they going to buy that after he failed to form a coalition? And by the way, after that. Yeah,
so failed to form a coalition with Israelis, but also failed to form one with the United States and Russia, apparently.
Exactly.
Give it a try.
Anyway, that's it. That's the summary. That'll just have to keep you till Monday when we're back and we do it again. Of course, you'll be back tomorrow, and you've even got more show to do today.
Yeah.
But I'm done.
All right.
So you're on your own. Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye. That's enough. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much for your help. Thanks for the extended segment as well. And, yeah, we'll discuss things again on Monday, provided all of us are still here.
Exactly right. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Have a good weekend. All right. Yeah, I'm just sort of scrolling down to see whether there's more from Barak Ravid. Maybe I just need to jump over to his timeline because that's a pretty major bombshell. Right at the top of his feed at the moment is news about Kushner having arrived at the wrong time. And I'm wondering whether that's actually the continuation. Like we said here, if the story is that Netanyahu was on the cusp of formulating, and what a terrible formulation of the event, the issue, to state it in terms of a trilateral committee. Like, okay, that rings no bells anywhere. But U.S., Russia, Israel trilateral committee that will meet in Jerusalem to discuss the security of the situation, or the security situation in the Middle East. Both of them agreed, and then Jared Kushner lands. Was this the kickoff of this trilateral committee, or what? Let me take a look at what. Should I scroll? How to do this? Scroll back to Ravid's tweet that we just read. Oh, a lot of his tweeting is in Hebrew too, so we might have to hit the translate button on some of those things. But let me see. Where did he? Where in his timeline did this fall? It happened yesterday afternoon, I think. I didn't see it until evening. Wow, and there's an awful lot more. But I guess what he's tweeting about... Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay, so 16 hours ago, he tweets the one we just read. And then, let's see, the next... I gotta skip the Hebrew for now and go to the English. Then the next report was the call for new elections because of the failure to form a government, which we just heard about from Greg. And look at this. Here, some of this tweeting is in Russian as well. Not his, but he's retweeting others. He's a multilingual guy, Barak Ravid. All right. Let's see. Where does he connect this to? What point in his timeline does the connection to Kushner come into things in English? This is the difficult part. Netanyahu meeting in his office 4 hours ago, he notes, in Jerusalem with President Trump's senior advisor Jared Kushner and U.S. envoy. That was as of 4 hours ago. And then he began on a short tweet thread. Palestinian President Abbas met last night in Amman with special envoy of the King of Bahrain, who tried to convince him to attend the U.S.-led economic conference in Manama. I'm not even certain where is that happening. Is that in Bahrain? I don't know. The Bahraini envoy told President Abbas that Bahrain didn't organize the economic conference but only agreed to host it after a request by the U.S. Abbas told the Bahraini envoy the Palestinian Authority will not attend this conference. Okay, that seems somewhat extraneous to what's going on now. And then more breaking news 2 hours ago. Netanyahu spoke to Jared Kushner today about the new elections in Israel and said, quote, "We had a small incident last night. It will not stop us, and we will continue working together. The U.S. under President Trump is bringing allies in the region closer against challenges," unquote. That's sort of a mishmash, not necessarily the best English in the world, but okay, so gobbledygook, basically though saying that he sees the failure to form a coalition as a bump in the road that might actually be solved in his favor in new elections, and what better way to solve your electoral problems than bringing in the Russians? We've learned that much. And then, let's see, 30 minutes ago, added to this was a tweet of another Israeli journalist for Haaretz, Amir Tibon, who tweeted, "Netanyahu's political crisis could kill Trump's peace plan." Oh, I guess that's the one that Greg was telling us about, right? The administration gave Netanyahu control over its own schedule, and now they discover Netanyahu's schedule is actually controlled by smaller Israeli parties. Very interesting. So yeah, Kushner's awful timing is the piece that Greg read and the piece that accompanies that tweet. So tying those two threads together now gives us a very interesting picture of the chaos in Israel that ensues after this failure, and that's the atmosphere in which they'll be entering into the new elections. What a tremendous surprise that must be for Netanyahu. Although, I don't know, he blurted that out in his defeat speech, whatever that might be, knowing that it was going, I guess, to color how the elections would be approached. What an odd thing. So now he decides to enter into elections by saying that he still intends to form a trilateral committee with the U.S. and Russia. Very strange angle on all this, and I have a feeling it may backfire and blow up in his face. Well, what can I tell you? We have to sit, wait, watch, and find out later. We'll be right back. Welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see where to go next. All right, into Pocket first before heading back to the Twitter feed. Let's see, a few things that I had put together and put away for discussion today. Let me take a look at all these things. Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one. And one of these days I need to get back to, and maybe I can edit together another segment from our friends Travis and Rachel at the Irreverent Testimony podcast. They were addressing this a few weeks ago, which is another good example of how we bring you the news before the news ever does. Although we've discussed the paradox of that. But they had, in addition to their very interesting segment on the Highlands Ranch school shooting and the aftermath and reaction, but they also did this great recap, which was very extensive, of what the Colorado state government, the legislature chiefly, but the government across the board had been up to, given that they now held, for the first time, as I recall Rachel saying since World War II, the complete trifecta in Colorado, both houses of the legislature and the governor's mansion. And this is an ABC News report that I tucked away, just having seen it via Twitter. The tweet from ABC News reads, "What Republicans and Democrats are doing in the states where they have total power." And they have a article accompanying that, but more to my liking was the graphic that they put up there. Side-by-side maps of the United States. On the left, a map highlighting in blue the states where Democrats hold the trifecta. And on the right, in more pink than red, the same map highlighting the places where Republicans hold the trifecta, and then a small chart explaining what's what they've been able to accomplish. But perhaps we read it in narrative form for those of us listening on the radio. Let's see. Where are we here? Oh, yes. Well, ABC News's tweet, actually, they use one of those tweet shortener or URL shorteners that uses abcn.ws, ABC News, I don't know, WS. What's that supposed to even be? I don't know. Maybe in their view, Washington, I got no idea. Anyway, but it actually leads to 538 of all places rather than ABC News. A Perry Bacon Jr. Piece that sounds like something you might be able to order at Hardee's or something, a Perry Bacon Jr. All right, well, anyway, what Republicans and Democrats are doing in the states where they have total power. Wow, some phrase here, right? The recent passage of a law in Alabama that essentially bans all abortions in the state resulted in a barrage of coverage of other abortion restrictions being adopted in conservative areas this year. But, as 538 illustrated in a story last week, this is not a new trend. Republican-controlled states have been chipping away at abortion access since the 2010 elections, probably even longer than that, which swept the GOP into power in state legislatures and governors' mansions across the country. Still, the Alabama law got us thinking. What policies, in addition to abortion limits, are being passed in a multitude of states? More specifically, what laws are being passed in trifecta states, in which one party controls both houses of the legislature and the governor's office? These states are ripe for bills to pass easily because the other party can't stop them, and they serve as a good indicator of each party's priorities and what it might do at the federal level given unfettered power. And the unstated X factor in all this, prefabricated cookie-cutter legislation from ALEC or some similar source. I mean, the way they put the question right at the beginning, Alabama law got them thinking, what policies in addition to abortion limits are being passed in a multitude of states? Different question. From what are the states that have Republican trifectas doing? But one of the things you'll discover along the way is that in many cases they're passing very similar, if not identical, legislation, and a lot of that will have roots in ALEC. It's not because, great minds think alike necessarily. It's more in Republican cases in particular that many of them have been handed so-called model legislation. I don't like to use that term because it implies a real scholarly bipartisan process, which just isn't the case with ALEC legislation. Anyway, let's continue with with their inquiry here. There is no formal clearinghouse for state policy changes, but there really is. So I looked for legislative patterns and consulted with national groups that work on state policy, such as the left-leaning State Innovation Exchange, which I'm glad they acknowledge that there is such a thing, but I see no acknowledgement of ALEC here, which is astounding, quite honestly. That if it isn't purposeful, then it's just a major league oversight, and you need to go back to the drawing board and do your work again. It's a great question, poorly answered. All right. The result is a non-exhaustive list of legislation that is passed in multiple trifecta states, either blue or red. The 14 states, which are home to about 112 million people that are totally controlled by Democrats, are pushing forward an agenda of, among other things, hiking the minimum wage, significantly above the federal $7.25 per hour, banning, for minors, therapy that is designed to, quote, convert, right, gay and lesbian people from homosexuality, in case you didn't know what it was that gay and lesbian people were, primarily interested in their private lives. This treatment is widely condemned by medical experts, absolutely true, and mandating that the electoral college votes in states go to whichever candidate wins the national popular vote. That's very interesting, and I don't know that I would have guessed that was tops on the list. And I don't know, pretty interesting. And I guess read that alongside the growing fervor for impeachment. Not only do we want to purge Donald Trump from the office to which he was illegitimately, quote unquote, elected, but we want to undo the constitutional system by which it happened, and with good reason. All right, so first of the charts then shows up. The blue states represented in the map here having Democratic trifecta in their government. Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California, all one big western block. The entire Pacific coast plus Nevada. Then a little gap there, and then Colorado, New Mexico block is the southwestern portion of the map. Then Illinois, moving east, and then another cluster here. Illinois just sort of floating in the middle there all by itself. Another cluster of New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, the tri-state area, as people in the north of New Jersey and south of New York call it. Oh, and the west of Connecticut. Not the east, as sometimes previously misstated on this show. But New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. Also Delaware, down at the bottom there. Pennsylvania is not on this map, of course, but sometimes down in the southern New Jersey, the tri-state area there is New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania. But, okay, the real tri-state area is New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, for whatever reason. And then Rhode Island is tacked on the other side there. So the two tiny states are attracted by the gravity of the tri-state area to form a 5-state contiguous block. Then a little gap again, and Maine. Hi, Bill. How's it going? Up there, all alone, separated only by New Hampshire and Vermont in between. So a short drive. Poor Illinois. All alone. Oh, also all alone out in the ocean, Hawaii. But they've always been all alone out in the ocean there, and they like it that way. So the chart reads, the policies being adopted in blue trifecta states, major initiatives in states where Democrats now have control. You know what that means. Type of legislation, and then there's colored dots, color-coded, and if you have this dot on your map of your state, you have done this thing. There's the ban on gay conversion therapy, which looks to be like maybe an orange dot. Appears to be, if I'm reading this map correctly, having taken place in Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California. So the Western Pacific block, including Hawaii, have all done that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Pacific states plus Nevada. The Colorado, New Mexico block. Let's see. Some of them. Oh boy, there's a whole code here. So in addition to the colored dot, if it is encircled, this dot is encircled in a black ring, then it says enacted / pending in 2019. So not sure exactly what that means, but I guess that the legislatures have at least considered them. Let's see. That is the case in Colorado and New Mexico. Let's see. That dot is there in Illinois, and I can't tell the color. It might be there in Maine, but I can't tell for sure whether that's a pink dot, which is actually for the popular vote instead of electoral college, or an orangish dot, which is the ban on gay conversion therapy. But maybe Bill, maybe you have some idea of what the state legislature has done. The dot's there for Rhode Island and Connecticut and Delaware and New Jersey and New York as well. Looks like almost everybody's on board with that one. Minimum wage action in Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Hawaii. Yeah, does everybody have that one? Yeah. I guess the only thing that's missing is, let's see, other popular ones that aren't everywhere are free college for at least 2 years. Looks like everybody may have moved on the minimum wage and popular movement, but not everywhere, on marijuana legalization as well. So that's when Democrats get control across the board. Banning gay conversion therapy, free college for 2 years, marijuana legalization, minimum wage hike, and substituting the popular vote for the electoral college in presidential elections. Little notes here at the bottom. The governors in Colorado and Maine have said they will sign bans on conversion therapy, but have not yet done so. That's an explanation for Maine. The Connecticut governor has also pledged to sign his state's minimum wage increase. Data include executive orders, referendums, and bills passed by legislatures and signed by the governor. The exact details of the free college and marijuana policies vary widely from state to state, including, maybe in, let's just make something up here. In Rhode Island, you can sell weed to pay for the first 2 years of college. That is not true, but I thought I would combine those two initiatives into one and just see how that goes. Maybe we'll push that across the board. The issues being pushed in liberal states aren't too surprising. They reflect a combination of, one, and by the way, these would be Roman numerals, but the lowercase i's being used here. One, initiatives the Obama administration was pushing in its latter stages, but couldn't get approved nationally because the GOP controlled Congress. That is to say, Barack Obama moved on them like a bitch, but couldn't get there, as Donald Trump once said. Roman numeral, lowercase 2. Reactions to the Trump era, particularly trying to ensure that another president is not elected without winning the popular vote. That's the one. And 3, priorities of the party's activists, which is kind of one of the fun things about being an activist in a state with a trifecta like that. You get to see those things reflected in the agenda. Of the 22 GOP totally controlled states, so let's get those numbers again. 14 Dem trifectas, 22 Republican trifectas. They are home to about 136 million people versus 112 million in the 14 states. But, it's almost twice as many states, but barely, not really all that much more in terms of population, which tells you something. Well, what's happening there? They have tried to eliminate restrictions on gun rights. Very popular. Stop cities from becoming sanctuaries for undocumented immigrants. Waste of time. And weaken the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement that targets the Israeli government for how it treats Palestinians. That is a strange set of priorities, really, and I guess probably a testament to the divide in this country that I wouldn't have guessed that those were at the top of their agendas either. I'd have guessed on gun rights. Might have come up with the immigration thing only because I know immigration uppermost on a lot of Republican conservative minds, but the only way a state can play in that game was probably the sanctuary city issues. And again, although I am aware of the place that Israel occupies in the evangelical conservative mind, I wouldn't have guessed that was top of the charts for state governments. But here we go. Types of legislation in this chart on Republican activity include anti-BDS stuff, right to work / no mandatory union dues. That another popular one across the board there. Medicaid work requirements, also allowed to carry concealed weapon without permit, ban on sanctuary cities. Those are the top issues there. And again, let's see, I thought I'll tell you the states on this map. Idaho, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And you know what? That technically that's all one big contiguous lump. They do connect. There are some sizable gaps in there, and particularly New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, missing from the middle of it. But otherwise, all connected. You can drive or walk, if you prefer, all the way through all of them. And that's interesting. And they, of course, represent a large chunk of the middle of the country. So also missing from these holes here that were in the map, Montana is a sizable gap between lying between Idaho and the Dakotas and north of Wyoming. Illinois gets in the way of connecting up Iowa, Missouri, and Indiana. Let's see, other large gaps that's really it, except for Louisiana sitting in between Texas, Arkansas, and Alabama, just sort of looking like a missing puzzle piece there. Very interesting. All right, well, similar to the Democratic list, this legislative agenda for Republicans represents 1, Trump administration priorities that can't get approved in Congress, 2, reactions to the Obama administration, particularly the attempts to limit Medicaid, which was greatly expanded in the Obama years, and 3, longtime conservative activists' causes like the gun restrictions or limiting gun restrictions, for example. Again, this is not a complete list of policies being enacted in a huge swath of the states. We purposely left out abortion, which is covered in more detail in another article that they link to. And some of these ideas have crossed the red-blue divide. For example, some Republican-controlled states like North Dakota are joining the push to decriminalize marijuana, and many blue states, including California and New York, have enacted anti-BDS provisions. That is true. It's also worth noting which policies are not proliferating at the state level. Despite national momentum in the Democratic Party for enrolling more people in Medicare-style government-run health insurance plans, only Washington state has adopted a so-called public option at the state level. And even as some of the party's presidential candidates emphasize hiking rates on the wealthiest Americans, totally controlled Democratic states haven't been as enthusiastic. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's push for a major tax increase on millionaires, for example, is facing strong resistance from his fellow Democrats in the state legislature. Some of whom are millionaires, of course, or millionaire adjacent. On the GOP side, national Republicans, particularly Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, are strong supporters of charter schools as an alternative to traditional public schools. But of the 6 states that don't currently have laws allowing for the creation of charters, 4, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and West Virginia, are totally controlled by the GOP. By the way, Nebraska not really a trifecta because they only have the one house in their legislature. So, but, if you control it, you control it. And to be sure, trifectas, which wouldn't be happening in Nebraska, don't represent each party at the state level in totality. There are Republicans who sometimes back liberal legislation and Democrats who embrace conservative priorities. For example, Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, a Republican, recently signed a minimum wage increase. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards, a Democrat, has backed some abortion limits. All that said, Sacramento, Salem, Santa Fe, and Springfield, those are the capitals, right, are very different places, but might at times have very similar legislation on the floors of their state legislatures. And if you live in Iowa, it's actually fairly useful to see what laws are passing in Alabama and Texas. They are likely to come to your state soon. The fact that the whole thing we're now done with and it never once mentioned ALEC, I think, is a major oversight. Could have been a strategic choice made by the writer, Perry Bacon Jr., and I'd be interested in hearing any justifications that might be made for it. But initially, I would say that seems like a major oversight to me. All right. Well, let's see. We'll continue on with others. And, what have we got here? Just picking up on what's been tweeted in the last couple minutes here. Let's see. Let's take some of the comments here. Mad Hatter, who, by the way, if you've been looking around for Mad Hatter and haven't found him on Twitter, that's because the actual Twitter handle attached to our friend Mad Hatter is Elrond50, ELROND 50, and I don't know whether searching Mad Hatter brings up his Twitter account or not. Anyway, the comment here again: why does everyone assume impeachment hurts Democrats when there are 22 Republican senators up for 2020? Why doesn't this put them in a world of hurt? Defend a lawless president and get pummeled back home? It's a good question. And I think the answer probably lies in the fact that we appear to inhabit alternate realities entirely. And they may come from states populated almost entirely by people who just think the opposite of the truth is true. And, it happens everywhere. And in some of these states, there's going to be a lot of poisoned minds working off of Fox News, and they'll have no idea that the president deserves impeachment because they've been told all along that it was all a hoax and a witch hunt. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Greg has sent something else along here. Brian Stetler's tweet, CNN's banner just now, although I guess it was a little while ago, Trump unleashes flurry of lies after Mueller statement. That's quite the CNN banner. So we'll definitely want to keep an eye on that and figure out what it was all about. Let's see. Is there more to that one? All right, well, we'll check that out later on. And Kate Sherrill sent us proof of what we already knew. Yes. Okay. Thanks very much, Kate. Yes, as a matter of fact, we actually got to that story with Greg a little bit earlier. Ari Berman tweeting this around, the new documents that show that the architect of Republican gerrymandering was behind Trump's push to add citizenship questions to the 2020 census. Okay, so at least we're on top of that one, and that one's on the record for us. Let's see. Need we add more to the John McCain, USS John McCain story? I don't think so. I think we're all clear on exactly how pathetic that is. The provenance of the story. I think originally seen that it had been originally reported by the Wall Street Journal. Greg mentioned that CNBC had gotten a hold of the emails. I don't know whether they were the first to get the actual emails and print them. But, of course, coverage has since seeped into the New York Times, which confirmed the story, and the Washington Post as well. So let's see. What other things have we to share? Yes. Let me call up the original tweet here. This was rather surprising, too. Patrick Snyder sent us this one. He's Patrick E. Snyder, as distinct from Patrick F. Snyder, who might also be out there. But if you're looking for the Twitter feed here, Patrick E. Snyder sent us this one. Well, looky here. And he even labeled it for KITM usage as well. It is the tweet thread from Chris Geidner, who notes this very extraordinary story. Speaking of absurd circumstances, and we're always speaking of absurd circumstances here, that's the show, Jeffrey Berman, who spells his name the old English way, Geoffrey, Jeffrey Berman is still serving as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. That's unusual. Why is it unusual? He is serving as U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York despite not being Senate confirmed. And then in all caps, he says, "This is unbelievable," which it used to be, but now isn't. He's been serving in this role as the lead prosecutor for a key jurisdiction, and it is a key jurisdiction, since January of 2018. Chris notes, I've talked about this before, giving us one of his old tweets about it, which reads, we've been talking a lot about whether, the word weather isn't in there. We've been talking a lot about Whitaker. Remember him? Matthew Whitaker and Barr and so on. But Berman's situation is also a big deal. Berman was being pitched for the nomination in July of 2017 and was interviewed by President Trump personally for the job. So how is it that has never resulted in actual Senate confirmation? Jeff Sessions first appointed Berman to the role as interim under one provision. Then the Southern District of New York District Court, so that the court where Berman tries cases ended up appointing him to continue in the role. There's never been a nomination, yet he remains there. It's also a little wild that SDNY just papers over the circumstances of his appointment on its website. I'd think the bio should actually explain how he's in the job, particularly given that he does not bear an acting or interim title. He's just thrown out there as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. That is pretty amazing. He's right about that one. Let's see. As noted by Sasha Sundberg Champion, and he connects to his Twitter account there, as he notes, there are other judicially appointed U.S. attorneys currently. Southern District of Illinois, for example. Their website bio is transparent about the process, however, and tells exactly how he came to that position. So once again, just another one of those things where, check the paperwork on anybody connected to Trump. There are people sitting there, sometimes clearly labeled as acting or interim officers, and sometimes not. But for the Southern District of New York to be sitting there with an appointed or a U.S. attorney placed there in an interim role and just appointed to the job more or less permanently by the court and having nobody taking notice is really It is. It's really rather pretty major. So I thought I'd better put that one on the record, though it's a little bit off of our beat. Well, it calls back to stories we've covered in the past. So I guess it certainly connects and makes sense, and Patrick knew as much when he sent it. All right, let's see. Definitely a couple other things here, but we do have the break coming up. And here comes the music. Let's see. What other things do we want to... Oh, you know what? We'll head back to Cindy Yang at some point in the show, too. Wendy Siegelman tweeting last night. Crazy story from last week. Another Chinese actor in all of this. Shi Jinjiang, wanted by Chinese authorities for an illegal $5.8 billion Ponzi scheme, living large in L.A. And in this picture, getting his photo with the president as well. Gee whiz. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's continue on here. I had mentioned just before the break Wendy Siegelman's tweeting of this crazy story from last week. So again, the guy's name here, Shi Jianjiang, and I'm sure I'm mangling things here, wanted by Chinese authorities for an illegal $5.8 billion Ponzi scheme, living large in L.A., and I guess he would be with $5.8 billion, 2 days after a photo with Trump at a fundraiser, attended, of course, by Cindy Yang, just to connect things back. Xi's accountant donated $50,000 to a PAC after an introduction by Elliot Broidy. Now back in the news. It's a Wall Street Journal article, and so I don't think I'm going to be able to get to that one unless at some point, maybe Greg can grab that one. You've got a subscription, but the article is Chinese fugitive living large in Los Angeles. Since fleeing China in 2016 in the face of fraud allegations, investor has partied with Mike Tyson and has had his picture taken with President Trump by James T. Aredy, Areddy. And I mean, I think it pretty much speaks for itself, but it looks like he's having a good time there, hanging out with the president. The president has no cares whatsoever about that, apparently, and he's connected in one way or another to Cindy Yang, and I guess they're looking to paper over all the criminality by giving to Elliot Broidy's PAC, which is amazing because he's a criminal himself. Just, I don't know. What can I tell you? It's a hell of a story. What else have we got here? Yeah, got that. This is also bears on the John McCain story here. Let me head back into Twitter and find some of the other things here. Yes. Great observation. Post-Mueller press conference. We've said pretty much the same thing, but I thought this was a great formulation from Adam Serwer, who put it this way yesterday. Mueller's statement is an indictment of a press that focused more on what people had to say about the report than what the report said, because the former was easier to cover. But unfortunately, no one has learned anything. We learned yesterday from yesterday's coverage. Trump's ability to dominate the news cycle is, in part, a function of his weak and supine opposition. But it's also that as an industry, we've learned nothing, meaning journalism, I guess, here. And then continuing on with a piece in The Atlantic, illustrated with a photo of Trump and Paul Ryan sitting there looking dumb and looking at one another. The U.S. media is completely unprepared to cover a Trump presidency. That was the piece that Adam published back in November of 2016. And I mean early on, November 11th, 2016. You remember that? Did we read it? Maybe we did at the time. It would be a little bit of a diversion for us to go through it here in totality now, but I'll show you the tweet thread, and that sits at the end, and you'll be able to look through it once we get the summary of today's show posted for you. Let me also acknowledge a very interesting diary that I saw at Daily Kos the other day from a Rodin fan. That's a very funny rhyme there. But this was briefly on the recommended list yesterday, and it kind of, it was, I don't know how long it was there, but it was gone by late afternoon. But I thought it was a really interesting take on a totally different subject, on immigration, specifically migration over the southern border. And I thought this was an interesting proposition, an interesting view of what was going on there. And I passed it on Twitter as an aside to an article on a similar subject. And it was quite popular, as was this diary on Daily Kos. But I wanted to give you a chance to take a look at this. It's the title of a Rodin fan's piece here is this harboring or a constitutionally protected exercise of religious freedom? It's essentially a story about the practice, now I guess ostensibly outlawed practice, of leaving food and particularly water out in the southwestern desert, the purpose of which is to essentially rescue and preserve the lives of migrants who have crossed, let's say, informally into the United States for whatever reason, and face a rather arduous trek through the desert, and sometimes it's hunger and thirst that do them in. And as a humanitarian gesture, people took to leaving bottled water out and available for them, sometimes clearly marked in Spanish as to note that it's a friendly gesture. Although I wonder whether I'm sure I've read in the past and have already forgotten. I don't want to put it past the militias to screw around with that premise. And of course, we have seen Border Patrol officials and others finding those stashes of water and emptying them out onto the ground, and watching these activities be criminalized, which is amazing to think about, the idea of criminalizing that kind of humanitarian relief. But the key observation, I thought, in all of this, and as I recall in reading over the diary yesterday, that it's never really explicitly stated quite this way, but humanitarian relief like that could very easily be defined as religious practice. I mean, given, sort of a major tenet of, I don't know, let's just choose, say, Christianity as an example. I'm not terribly well versed there, but most of the other major, certainly Abrahamic religions, as they call them, feature many of the same tenets. But for a country that even where conservatives love to harp on the Christian nature of our supposedly American values, helping the poor and migrants in particular is a major tenet. We've pointed out the hypocrisy of evangelicals and conservatives and ultra-conservatives on this front before in the past. But I guess what was most interesting to me was the possibility that conservative political activism carves out here via, for instance, decisions along the lines of the Hobby Lobby case, that if this were a sincerely held religious belief that you had a moral obligation to help the poor, the dying, the starving, the thirsty, the migrants, the stranger in a strange land, then how could you be criminalizing this and prosecuting people for their sincerely held Christian religious beliefs? I mean, we always mocked the whole idea about Republicans' ideas about what constitutes sincerely held religious belief, because, of course, we know that, for instance, they wouldn't permit sincerely held Native American religious beliefs, for instance, to stand in the way of prosecuting people for any number of things. We all know the examples that come up most often, but there are probably several that we don't discuss quite as often, and whatever. But the point here is you don't even have to expand your mind enough to come to the realization that, yes, there are legitimate religions that aren't Christian, if you want to just draw the line there, and sometimes they will allow for Judeo-Christian values. Occasionally you'll find somebody who might possibly regard Islam as among one of the major religions of the world, and a legitimate one at that. But supposing you were even one of the ultra-conservatives who only acknowledged Christianity as a legitimate religion, how do you get around defining this sort of act as not a religious belief? And given that you have insisted on the right of, let's see, pharmacists who might have a sincerely held religious belief opposing birth control from filling such prescriptions, or sincerely held religious beliefs that might say, for instance, excuse you from vaccination, although those are rapidly disappearing, or refusing to bake cakes for certain weddings, or whatever stupid issue it is that they've picked up on. They have insisted that religious belief be treated seriously, and that it was that it ought to be illegal and considered unconstitutional to, as they view it, persecute people for their religious beliefs. Why that doesn't materialize in form of protecting people from prosecution for humanitarian missions like this is a big mystery. So let me just read quickly through a Rodin fan's approach to all this, although maybe I think we've probably pretty well summarized the issue here, and maybe I should just leave it for you to read through the diary, and if it's too long, and it really isn't for you to read, but you just want to have the takeaway, why doesn't the Hobby Lobby type exemption, or the pharmacist exemption, or the wedding cake baker exception intervene here to preclude prosecution of people who are practicing their Christianity? And maybe it's because, for all I know, the people putting this water out don't want to express it in terms of Christianity, or they aren't practicing of any religious beliefs, or are perhaps they're atheistic. I don't have any idea where they're coming from. Or they just think it shouldn't have to be justified that way. But I think you'll probably pretty easily find people who would be perfectly willing to justify it in those terms, and they ought to press a case like that and instruct others who are interested in doing the same kind of humanitarian work to do the same. And who knows, it might even be good for religion if we were to do that. So I thought that was a really interesting observation, and a case just waiting to happen. So I thought I would take that and share it with you. I love the idea of shaking up the thinking in that way. All right, let's see. Something else that I had put aside from the other day, which I guess we ought to keep an eye on, NYC Southpaw's tweet simply stating the UK legal system is full of surprises, but attaching here a CNN story that tells us that Boris Johnson, apparently, at least as of yesterday, and I haven't kept up with things, was under consideration as perhaps the next Prime Minister following Theresa May's resignation. The headline here reads, Boris Johnson to face trial for alleged Brexit lies. That caught his eye and mine too. So NYC Southpaw says the UK legal system is full of surprises, follows up with a connected tweet afterwards which says, imagine if we had this cause of action in the US, my friends. So just to catch up on exactly what that is, Boris Johnson, favorite to be Britain's next PM, to face court for alleged Brexit lies, reports Sheena Mackenzie of CNN. The leading candidate to succeed Theresa May as British Prime Minister has been ordered to appear in court to face allegations he lied to the public during the 2016 Brexit referendum campaign. A judge at Westminster Magistrates Court in London ruled that Boris Johnson, a former UK Foreign Secretary, must face a private summons on 3 counts of misconduct in public office. Johnson, who was the high-profile face of the Leave campaign, is accused of falsely claiming that Britain's membership of the European Union cost £350 million, or $442 million, per week. And you see here the Vote Leave battle bus, as they called it, parked outside of the Houses of Parliament in 2016 with the message. Maybe you have seen a photo of this bus. We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead. Vote Leave. Let's take back control. And I bet they wouldn't fund the NHS with that money anyway. Plus, it was a lie. The claim was plastered on the side of a bus that toured Britain during the tightly fought campaign that resulted in a 52% vote in favor of the UK leaving the EU. Having considered all the relevant factors, I am satisfied that this is a proper case to issue the summons as requested for the 3 offenses as drafted, wrote Judge Margot Coleman. The summons was lodged by Marcus Ball and financed by a crowd-funded campaign. He claims Johnson misled the public in the run-up and aftermath of the referendum and repeated the £350 million claim during the 2017 general election. In his application, Ball's case was that Johnson, quote, knew that such comments were false or misleading, unquote, and that on other occasions had used, quote, accurate figures and showed a clear understanding of how to quantify UK spending in respect of the EU, unquote. Ball's lawyers argued that lying on a national and international platform undermines public confidence in politics, adding that Johnson's actions warranted a criminal sanction. The applicant's legal team wrote to Johnson in November of 2018 asking him to provide a written explanation for his claims, which never came. Johnson's lawyers dismissed the application as a political stunt made by the prosecutor from campaign group Brexit Justice Limited, whose sole purpose is to, quote, undermine the result of the Brexit referendum, unquote. According to who, I do not know. Johnson's representative said the application did not amount to an evidential and legal case for the issuing of a summons. Instead, he said, for the first time in English legal history, it attempts to, quote, employ the criminal law to regulate the content and quality of political debate, unquote. Were the application to succeed in a criminal sanction, it could pave the way for other crowd-funded private prosecutors lodging applications against British politicians over misleading statements. What happens next? Johnson will now face a preliminary hearing at the Magistrates Court, which will decide whether to send the case on to the higher Crown Court. At this point, the British Prosecuting Authority, the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, could step in to take over the prosecution and shut it down if it feels there is no public interest served in going ahead with it. Alternatively, Johnson's legal team could seek a judicial review of the magistrate's decision, a process that could take months. Count on that, I would guess. The application comes at a delicate time in British politics, with Westminster in turmoil over Brexit negotiations and Prime Minister May last week announcing she was stepping down as leader of the governing Conservative Party in light of her failure to deliver on the result of the 2016 vote. Pundits have now put Johnson at the top of a wide field of candidates to succeed May next month. But with voters turning their backs on the 2 major parties, the Conservatives and Labour, in favor of fringe movements such as the Brexit Party and Greens during last week's European elections, the next Prime Minister will need to unite a deeply divided nation. Happy news for Vladimir Putin and his crew there in Russia, plus the bonus of being able to move into Israel as well. By the way, speaking of that region, something I skipped yesterday and we might be able to squeeze in today. Where did I see this retweeted from? This is an old article from 2008 in The Guardian, and one of you in our conversations along the way sent this on to me. But as we were not surprised necessarily to learn last week or maybe the week before. We had the additional weird and unfounded emergency declaration and order, allegedly, from Donald Trump. Once again, where's the paperwork on it? I don't know. But he was using the national emergency excuse, which he now thinks he can use for any object, to continue with the supply of weapons to Saudi-owned Arabia, even in the face of congressional opposition to it, which he vetoed. But I guess the sales had to be authorized in some way, and the Congress has refused to do it. And so he steps in and authorizes it himself under an emergency declaration. Well, this bears on things. It doesn't bear on the legal status of his order, but it bears on the unsuitability of the current state of the alliance and the weapons sales. From 2008, the Guardian's report, BAE secret papers reveal threats from Saudi prince. A key quote here from the article is this: Saudi Arabia's rulers, this is back in 2008, threatened to make it easier for terrorists to attack London unless corruption investigations into their arms deals were halted, according to court documents revealed yesterday. What happened to this story, I do not know, but an important piece, I thought, to add to the overall puzzle. Saudi Arabia's rulers, and it was, I guess, a different set of rulers in 2008 than we're facing today. Those clearly, the new rulers are just as ruthless, if not more so. Saudi Arabia's rulers threatened to make it easier. Can you imagine? Make it easier for terrorists to attack London. I mean, if that's not an admission of guilt, I don't know what is. Unless corruption investigations into their arms deals were halted, according to court documents revealed yesterday. This would have been February 15th, 2008. So, on the 14th, I guess, Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Previously secret files describe how investigators were told they faced another 7/7. Of course, that would be the date of an attack there in the UK. Not as frequently recognized in the United States as 9/11 was, but there it is. And the loss of British lives on British streets if they pressed on with their inquiries and the Saudis carried out their threat to cut off intelligence. That's the way they were framing it that made it sound like they weren't simply going to sanction their own terrorists. But that's pretty much what we've always suspected that they did along the way anyway. Prince Bandar, the head of the Saudi National Security Council and son of the Crown Prince, not MBS, was alleged, prior to MBS, right, was alleged in court to be the man behind the threats to hold back information about suicide bombers and terrorists. He faces accusations that he himself took more than £1 billion in secret payments from the arms company BAE. He was accused in yesterday's High Court hearings of flying to London in December of 2006 and uttering threats which made the Prime Minister, Tony Blair at that time, force an end to the Serious Fraud Office investigation into bribery allegations involving Bandar and his family. Now, MBS might be, maybe he gained popularity in the West at first by threatening to, promising to undermine these then ruling Sauds and Saudis, and put an end to their corruption and substitute it with his own. But definitely an interesting part of the record that I missed entirely. He was accused, Bandar, I guess, in yesterday's High Court hearings, right, of flying to London and making these threats. The threats halted the fraud inquiry, but triggered an international outcry with allegations that Britain had broken international anti-bribery treaties. Lord Justice Moses, how do you like that name, hearing the civil case with Mr. Justice Sullivan, said the government appeared to have rolled over after the threats. He said one possible view was that it was, quote, just as if a gun had been held to the head, unquote, of the government. The SFO, Serious Fraud Office, investigation began in 2004 when Robert Wardle, its director, studied evidence unearthed by The Guardian. This revealed that massive secret payments were going from BAE to Saudi Arabian princes to promote arms deals. Yesterday, anti-corruption campaigners began a legal action to overturn the decision to halt the case. They want the original investigation restarted, arguing the government had caved in to blackmail. The judge said he was surprised the government had not tried to persuade the Saudis to withdraw their threats. He said, if that happened in our jurisdiction, the UK, they would have been guilty of a criminal offense. Counsel for the claimants said it would amount to perverting the course of justice. Sounds sort of familiar and like a weird parallel to what goes on here in the United States these days. Wardle told the court in a witness statement, the idea of discontinuing the investigation went against my every instinct as a prosecutor. I wanted to see where the evidence led. But a paper trail set out in court showed that days after Bandar flew to London to lobby the government, Blair had written the Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, and the SFO was pressed to halt its investigation. The case officer in the inquiry, Matthew Cowie, C-O-W-I-E, was described by the judge as a complete hero for standing up to pressure from BAE's lawyers who went behind his back and secretly tried to lobby the Attorney General to step in at an early stage and halt the investigations. The campaigners argued yesterday that when BAE failed at its first attempt to stop the case, it changed tactics, having argued it should not be investigated in order to promote arms sales. It then recruited ministers and their Saudi associates to make the case that national security demanded the case be covered up. Moses said that after BAE's commercial arguments failed, lo and behold, the next thing, there's a threat to national security. Dinah Rose, counsel for the Corner House and the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, said. Yes, they start to think of a different way of putting it, Moses responded. That's very unkind. Documents seen yesterday also show the SFO warned the Attorney General that if he dropped the case, it was likely it would be taken up by the Swiss and the U.S. Well, no longer the case that the U.S. would take up such a case, but back in 2008, maybe so. These predictions proved accurate, did they? Bandar's payments were published in The Guardian, and Switzerland subsequently launched a money laundering inquiry into the Saudi arms deal. The U.S. Department of Justice, remember them, has launched its own investigation under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act into the British money received in the U.S. by Bandar when he was ambassador to Washington. Prince Bandar yesterday did not contest a U.S. court order preventing him from taking the proceeds of property sales out of the country. The order will stay in place until a lawsuit brought by a group of BAE shareholders is decided. The group alleges that BAE made $1 billion of illegal bribe payments to Bandar while claiming to be a highly ethical, law-abiding corporation. If there really is such a thing, well, that would be pretty surprising. Anyway, I wonder what happened with that. And by the way, kudos to The Guardian for so clearly labeling their older articles. That is a frequent mistake we make on Twitter, or sometimes sending things around that are dated, and sometimes considerably so, and we just don't notice until, someone with a sharp eye notes that this is from a year ago or 2 years ago by looking at the date line. The Guardian, right up at the top of the display view of the article, it says in a big bright yellow box, there's a little clock icon, and it says, this article is more than, and then it's bolded, 11 years old. And even when you tweet the article around, the tweet displays a big yellow box over whatever graphic and picture gets pulled up along with the tweet, and it says from 2008. So there's no mistaking that, and I think that's really a brilliant feature, and really all news sites should have that. It can't be complicated at all to add that. Anyway, despite the fact that it's from 2008 and not only a long time ago, but totally different regimes in the UK, the US, probably Switzerland, and Saudi Arabia, nonetheless indicative of the very weird and contentious relationship we have as between us as allies. The idea of threatening the UK with making it easier for suicide bombers to kill people in London unless we get more weapons. Well, now, why would we do that? We're supposed to give you more weapons so that you can what? put them on suicide bombers and demand even more weapons? How do we know you're not going to send suicide bombers to try to negotiate a new price for the weapons? But again, all of this predates MBS. And I wouldn't be surprised if MBS made the case to the United States and the UK that he was all about eliminating that stuff from the way the Saud-owned government would do business. And maybe he did and just substituted a different kind of personal terrorism for the old school way of doing things. Anyway, just thought that was an interesting addition to the background. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, to discuss all the other things that we haven't been able to bring up and pull out of pocket yet, and there's plenty of them, and who knows what else will blow up in the meantime. But for our purposes here on Netroots Radio, I do know what's going on in the meantime. It's time for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Let's do it, what he's got on the menu today. Rudy Giuliani suggested that Robert Mueller took tips from the Soviet Union on how to hold a press conference. If it was keep it to 8 minutes, it was a good idea. Then, on the rest of his menu, a leaked British Army guide for spotting far-right extremism in the ranks fits the behavior of some leading U.S. conservatives, including the guy who didn't get any help from Russia. You know who that was, right?
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Leading voices in Russian election and infrastructure interference efforts in the U.S. rally to support Maria Butina. Remember her? And a curious question arose from the special counsel's statement that is yet to be answered. Why did Mueller only resign now? On the international front, an attempt by Brazil's far-right president to weaken environmental laws.